Toby, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Matt. This is great.
Okay, so audience, I got to tell you, if you're watching on YouTube, the scene behind Toby is just stunning. Absolutely beautiful background, and it's real. So you're talking to us from Wellington in New Zealand?
Yeah, that's right. This is my home where I live. So I've actually got my mixing studio at home, which, part of it is because, I've got this view so I can just mix and then come out here and just sit outside. And then I've got my recording studio in town. And I think this view is probably a little bit better than my recording studio. So
Toby comes on the call and the first thing I see is this ocean background. And I'm like, oh my God.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm envious. Makes me want to go outside and see I'm all sealed up in here.
Yeah, it's quite hard not to be zen with a backdrop like this,
Yeah. And what did you say? You did your cold plunge and your meditation?
Yeah, I set my alarm for half an hour before the kids get up. So, because I got 5 kids. So I get up and then I meditate for 25 minutes and then I make them their breakfast and then I go and jump in the cold plunge, which is like an ice bath that I've got outside, and then come back in and get them off to school. Yeah,
I would need to get up and meditate if I had 5 kids too. Well, let's get cracking here. So as we said, you're talking to us from Wellington in New Zealand, and audience, it's 10 a.m. there. It's 3 p.m. here in the West Coast in California. So you're living in the future because it's 10 a.m. tomorrow.
Yeah, like I said last time we caught up, we're the original party animals. We get to celebrate New Year's before anybody else does. Actually, that's a lie. There's one small island, the Chatham Islands, that is the first place to celebrate New Year's, and we're just behind that.
Yeah, we don't have to tell anybody about that. That's cool. Well, let's start with, as if you listen to the show at all, let's start with the state of the state. What is the current state of things for you? What are you doing? What's your workload like? And what do you consider yourself? Producer, engineer, mixer, all of that?
Yeah, so I guess I consider myself a music producer, mixing engineer, and score mixer as probably the core foundations. Also ADR recordist, recording engineer. Typically, I would say 95% of my work is producing. Actually, no, that's probably a lie. Probably 80% producing, and then 20% mixing. And so the mixing involves, not only artists that are making music, but score. So I've just, for the last 4 days, been mixing one of the craziest films I've ever worked on in my life. And I've worked on quite a few films, but this was a score for an alien, kind of like an alien gets a girl pregnant and she ends up having this alien baby, and it's hilarious. Like it's probably somewhere between like comedy and horror, and it is, you see alien penises and, with tentacles and all of this. It's crazy, absolutely bonkers. So I spent 4 days looking at alien penises and trying to, spin the world around the 5.1 environment. And then, I've got a studio in town that I'm very, very busy in. So I employ an engineer to do the sessions that I don't really want to do, or weekend sessions, so then I can actually be a dad, present dad on the weekend. And so I try and keep my work Monday to Friday, basically like 9:30 to 6:30 as much as I can. And things are busy here. I got a rooftop recording studio, so I think that's got beautiful views as well. It's kind of overlooking our parliament. I'm very, very blessed. Got a lot of cool projects on.
Oh my gosh. It sounds like you're very busy. Well, let's go back to the beginning. Where did you grow up, and what was that upbringing like in terms of music and technology?
Yeah, so I grew up in Nelson, which is kind of like the northernmost city at the top of the South Island of New Zealand. Beautiful, beautiful city, very outdoorsy. So I grew up in the outdoors. Music was like a pretty big part of our household. We always had like Janis Joplin playing, or Tracy Chapman, Pink Floyd, all of that kind of stuff. But I tried playing guitar when I was 8, but they just taught us really crap songs that I didn't want to hear, and I'm like, why am I punishing myself, because it hurts so much to play acoustic guitar. So I gave it up. And then when I was in intermediate, so when I was like 11 or 12, I heard Nirvana Smells Like Teen Spirit, and that just changed everything. Like I picked up a guitar again, and Started falling in love with punk rock, all of those kind of like West Coast LA bands, Bad Religion and NoFX and Good Riddance and stuff like that. And then I started writing music, and I've probably still got it somewhere. I've got hundreds and hundreds of pages of songs that I was writing, probably all about girls when I was 13 or feeling misunderstood. And so I joined bands, and my parents were very, very supportive of me kind of pursuing a career in music, which was amazing, because I originally was going to do a Bachelor of Commerce in Management and Marketing, and I did a year of that, and I'm like, why am I doing this? Music was why I live and breathe. So I switched courses, and my parents were telling me to go for it, and went and studied audio engineering. And so it was I think it really came from the love of songwriting. It didn't come from a love of guitar. It came from a love of hearing songs playing through my speakers and just feeling something, as we often do when we're teenagers. We can be quite emotional beings, and I think hearing other singers going through similar things that what I was going through just kind of connected with me. And so it was the love of song more than the love of music that made me want to pursue this career.
When did you become aware of recording? Was there a moment that sparked the interest in studying recording?
I think there was two things. I think I heard, because up until in my teenage years, I was just listening to music, right? I didn't notice sound. I was just like, I was hearing song. And then I heard a record by A Perfect Circle, 13th Step. And I think there was particularly, I think it was, is it The Package, the first song on the album? And I was like, oh, this sounds insane. You've got those like big roomy drums and those cross sticks, and I think Sylvia Massey engineered it, and Andy Wallace mixed it. And it was the first time I'd noticed sound. I was like, whoa, this isn't just about the song. This is about the sound of it. And that kind of opened my mind up to what production was, because up until that point I hadn't thought of it. And me and my band, they were playing terrible music, kind of like a mix between Incubus and Creed. We went into what we called a recording studio, but basically was a guy that was maybe 2 years older than us. He had an 8-track recorder, and his parents were rich, so they had a big mansion. So we went into his house and recorded 8 songs in a day or something like that, And then we came round, and he was doing some mixing on it, and we came around to listen back, and I was just like, no, that doesn't sound right. The bass sounds, the intonation's slightly out on the bass, or there seems to be some like muddy frequencies going on in there. And he was like, man, maybe you should be like a recording engineer or music producer. And I was like, oh, okay. Didn't really know, that was possible in my career. And I think that just sparked an idea. Here's this engineer telling me that maybe it's something that I should follow because I had the ear for it. So yeah, I packed up my things and moved to a different city, and kind of didn't really look back.
Where did you move?
I moved to Christchurch, which is just an awful city. Apologies to anyone who lives in Christchurch. It's an angry town. I've spent a lot of my childhood there. My family spent a lot of time there. And so I moved there for 2 years and studied in this kind of audio institute that specialized in music production. It was great. It was amazing. We had access to these studios, which weren't that flash, but they were studios. It was the best thing that I'd been in up until that point. Yeah, it was really, really cool. I kind of I fell in love with recording, and I didn't know if it was possible to make a career out of it, because there was a lot of people in my class that were way more talented than me, that seemed to be able to actually hear compression, and I was like, I still don't understand how compressors work. I think that was very, very foundational for me, because what that taught me was you don't actually have to be the smartest person in the room. But actually, if you're dedicated to something and you throw everything that you've got at it, you can actually make a career out of it. Because a lot of those people that I studied with didn't actually go on to do anything. They had the gift, they were natural talents, they could, very, very intelligent, but maybe didn't have the work ethic. And I wasn't intelligent and, didn't have the skills, but I had the work ethic. And when a lot of my friends were going out partying, I was staying at home working on productions and just working towards that goal. And so I think there's something to be said that, work ethic over core intelligence is actually a pretty good thing. Yeah,
just showing up every day,
Well, it's a hard industry, it's a brutal industry, and it can be dog eat dog for a lot of people out there. And if you're kind of like, if you've got thin skin, it's probably going to be quite a hard path for you. But if you're maybe as naive as what I am, where I'm like, of course I can make this happen, I've just got to keep showing up, I think there's probably a good chance that you will actually make it. It's that whole thing that if you don't give up, you can't fail.
In the schooling situation, did you find, the facilities and the instruction you received, were they were they on par with each other? Was one better than the other?
Yeah, the whole experience there was a bit weird. Like I loved the tutors. They were really, really nice people. They weren't necessarily accomplished engineers. The facilities were pretty average, but I think it really comes down to one thing. One of the tutors basically said, "The studio that we've got here, probably none of you will ever work in a studio as good as this ever again." And being the little punk rocker that I was like, I'm going to show him. Yeah, I'm gonna. And he probably said that because he was trying to light a fire under like naive people like myself or arrogant people like myself's asses, to try and prove something. Because it's a hard industry, and if a comment like that is going to dissuade you away from pursuing this career, maybe you're not cut out for it. So I think he was probably saying that to see who was actually going to stick around and who was actually going to go for it. And so that was actually probably the most valuable thing that I ever got taught. As far as what they actually taught, man, I came out of that course knowing nothing. I came out and I was working at a music store for a wee while, and I was making so many mistakes in that music store, like plugging speak-on cables in the wrong way and damaging their amplifiers. And
oh my,
and I still couldn't hear compression. I barely knew what I was doing with an EQ. But there's something to be said about learning through failure.
On the topic of thin skin, it's interesting. I think one could have thin skin as long as you have an avenue in which to dissipate the anger that it generates afterwards. It's like bottle it up and then let it out when it's necessary or when it's more appropriate. Because, even to this day, as long as I've been in it, sometimes somebody will say something and you're just kind of like, I'll be bitching about that later. I'll be complaining to the wife. I'll be, talking to myself. That son of a bitch, blah, 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 blah.
I think that's why, as in my experience, people that play heavy metal music are some of the nicest people I've ever met in my life. They've got somewhere to direct their anger to.
You're right. It's very cathartic for them, and they get that anger out. Especially a heavy metal drummer.
Yeah, exactly.
Feel that music and hit shit.
Yeah, whereas I just kind of have to run it out. I'll just go for a big 10K run over the mountain behind my hill, and that's kind of my way to get that excess energy out.
Run up the mountain and just yeah. So what happened after school, and what are the steps that brought you to Wellington?
So I ended up moving up to Wellington to try and, I didn't like Christchurch, the city I was living in, so tried to come up here and tried to go around the recording studios. There was only probably 3 recording studios in Wellington at that point in time, maybe 4. None of them were hiring because that's not how the New Zealand music industry works. You basically build a studio, work in it yourself, and then that's it. And so I ended up doing live sound. So I did live sound, and I was doing corporate AV ceremonies. And so after a couple of years of doing that, I ended up, I also worked in a record store for a while as well, which was great. I think that was the last of the record stores in New Zealand, basically, as well. I was managing a store the day that the liquidators walked in and, closed down the giant national chain. But so I ended up moving to England, and I wanted to try and make it as a music producer over there, because I'm like, if you can make it, if you can't make it in London, where else can you make it? 11 million people over there. So we went over there, and that was global financial crisis. Recession was still very much in place. And I rang around about 110 recording studios, and just turned up to recording studios, knocking on their doors, and they were like, "We're struggling to stay open, let alone hire anybody. This ain't happening." And so after being rejected by about 110 recording studios, I kind of had a bit of an existential crisis, and I was like, God, maybe I need to give up the dream. And so I flew back to New Zealand after being there for a year, just working in a live sound company. And I had enrolled in a university course in environmental management. And I told my partner at the time, if just one job comes up, just one job, and I hadn't seen a job advertised in audio for the whole time I was trying to make it, which was 4 years since leaving university. And I said, if one job comes up, I'm just going for it. So I landed into Nelson and staying at my parents' house, and I went on the job website, seek in New Zealand. And I saw there was a job advertised for an audio engineer up in Auckland, which is on the top city of the North Island, a couple of hours flight away. So I called up the company and I said, if you give me an interview, I'll jump on a plane right now. I'll spend a couple of $100 and I'll fly up just for an interview. And they were like, oh man, this guy's pretty keen. And so we ended up having a good chat on the phone. And this was the recruiter. And he was like, let me talk to the boss because we've had a lot of good CVs, but I like your vibe. And he was like, I'll get back to you. And I'm like, okay, but I need to know soon because I'm about to start studying in 3 days time. And I didn't hear back from them. So I jumped in my car, packed up my life, drove to Christchurch to start studying again. And in the very first lecture of environmental management, my phone started ringing and I saw it as the number from the company. So I literally ran out, grabbed my bag, ran outside the lecture hall and answered it. And they were like, do you still want to fly up for that interview? I was like, yeah. And they were like, all right, come on up. So I booked a flight, I think that day or maybe the next day, and flew up to Auckland and just got along really, really well with them and managed to score the gig. So I was basically creating soundtracks for books. And the boss told me years later, he was like, the reason why we hired you wasn't because you're the most talented or you had the best CV. It was because you had the best attitude and you were so willing for the job that you would spend hundreds of dollars to fly up to our city just for the job interview, with no guarantees that you're going to get it. So while working there, they ended up developing, and I was one of the first sound engineers in this company. And so they developed a relationship with Park Road Post, who was Peter Jackson's facility down in Wellington. And so the head of sound of Park Road would fly up and I'd kind of work with him on these projects. And then we ended up scoring a couple of pretty big projects and they were like, we want you to fly to Park Road and work from Park Road with their team on these books. I was like, great, amazing, sweet, this is my chance. So again, I just jumped on a plane, flew down to Wellington, and started working at Park Road Post on these books, still for my previous company. And so at that point in time, they were working on some really cool films. I think they were just finishing Tintin or something like that, the Steven Spielberg film. And I started, trying to have as many coffee dates with the engineers there as I could and just kind of being like, hey, can I come and sit in and watch what you guys are doing? And so after maybe 8 months of that, one of the engineers at Park Road came in and he was like, hey, just to let you know, I'm going to hand in my notice today. I think you should pop your CV in and tell the head of sound that you're looking for work. So I literally emailed the head of sound that night. I was like, hey, just to let you know, I'm thinking of quitting this company. I would love if there's any opportunities in the future to be considered. Just let me know. And he was like, wow, actually, something might have just come up. And so they didn't. I think they had to advertise to their job, for the job legally. But they gave me the position because they were gearing up for the Hobbit. So I went from doing music stuff to audiobook stuff to all of a sudden working on one of the biggest films of the past 10 years or 20 years now. And that was a very, very intimidating process because I didn't even know what 5.1 surround sound was. I had no idea about any of the film stuff. But, like I say, the intelligence might not be there, but the work ethic was. So I just studied the manuals, tried to understand the euphonic System 5 consoles, and somehow managed to land on my feet, not make too many mistakes. And
so what was your role there when you took that new job and you started working on The Hobbit?
Yeah. Luckily, I had a couple of films before that. There was a film called The Emperor, which had Matthew Fox in it, and some other. It was like a World War II film. But yeah, it was basically it was called a sound recordist. So it's there to basically make sure that the system is working the way it should, right? That the mixing consoles are working, because those mixing consoles, which is very, very different to the music world, you're connecting maybe 5 or 6 Pro Tools rig, synchronizing it over satellite. Back then it wasn't satellite. Back then it was just sync IO. So you're connecting 5 or 6 Pro Tools rigs all to this mixing console. So when the mixing console hits play using the sound master, all of them just start playing in time with the picture. And so as you can imagine, there's a lot that can go wrong. This
is a post-production role, not an on-location role.
No. So This is post-production. This is working with the big heavy hitting mixing engineers that, win all the Academy Awards, and I got to meet some amazing people in that role. But yeah, it was basically making sure that everything was working the way it should. If Pro Tools crashes, get it up and running, and then once they'll finish mixing a reel, they'll print it down onto a separate Pro Tools rig, and you've got to make sure that it prints properly, and they haven't made any mistakes. It's almost like it's a mixture between like a quality control agent and an assistant, and so it's like, maybe if you hear something that sounds wrong in the speakers, you go and tap the mixer gently on the shoulder and be like, hey, you might need to check this. And and a lot of those mixers as well, because they're a bit older, they can't hear the really ultra high frequencies, and they used to call me Bat Boy because I'd be like, oh, there's a high pitch whine at 16K, can we kill that? And so it was basically in that first early role, it was making sure the mixing theaters were running smoothly, because those are very, very expensive mixing theaters, and a production's paying like $10,000 a day have these three re-recording mixers all on the console, working away, plus all these sound editors.
Working on heavy duty films.
Yeah, with heavy duty people, it was it was quite intense, coming from working with 3-piece indie bands to working on multi-million-dollar films, where the mistakes that you make could cost thousands and thousands of dollars. It was quite a high pressure situation. And I learned a lot. Like, I think one of the biggest differences between film and music is often music can be quite isolating. As a music producer, you're kind of just working away in your room. You've got your bands with you, but you're not necessarily rubbing shoulders with other producers. You're not sitting in on other sessions with engineers very frequently. You might do it every so often, but whereas film, you've got, like on the Hobbit film, we had about 35 sound editors, and they're all working together, or 35 people on the sound team, and they're all working together. And so if I was sitting in the mixing theater, there might be 2 other assistants, there might be 3 mixing engineers, there might be 5 sound editors and an effects supervisor and a dialogue supervisor and a music supervisor, all sitting in the same room together. And so what happens is you see all of these Pro Tools tricks, right? Or you see all of these mixing tricks, and you're like, what just happened there? You're watching one of the effects editors do like a shortcut, and I'm like, oh my God, like this guy's so fast. And so I'd sit there and I'd take notes, be like, okay, he did something like this. And then at an opportune moment, maybe at the end of the day, I'll be like, hey, I saw you do this little edit earlier, pushing a button. Like, what was that? And so they would be like, oh yeah, no, I just pushed this key combination. And so when you're around 35 of the best sound editors in the world, you learn a lot of things very, very fast. And my notebook was completely full of shortcuts, to the point that I would just go and like practice what they had done. I'd go back into the machine room, which is where all the computers work, and I'd open up Pro Tools and I'd just try and practice what they were doing. And pretty soon I became very, very fast and efficient with Pro Tools, far faster than, like, I didn't even know you could be fast in Pro Tools. It was just like, you go and click on the thing and you go and move the thing. And now I'm seeing like smoke coming from their keyboards, and I'm like, oh man. So sitting around all of these incredibly talented people, I started just being like a sponge and just learning all of this stuff. And so pretty soon I was probably one of the fastest kind of editors or, engineers in the company, because I was just observing all these things and practicing all these things. And so sometimes the head of sound would just bring me into a room when he had a client, just because he wanted to impress the client, because, he'd get me to edit something, and then he'd be like, watch this, And through that efficiency, it's actually carried forth in my career, and I've actually got a lot of projects from some pretty cool artists, purely because they've seen me edit something on Pro Tools, or they've seen me comp a vocal and they were like, how did you do that so fast? And I think that is the beautiful thing about the film industry, is that collaboration, being able to like be inspired by all of these people, which it's really, really hard to do just by watching videos on YouTube. It's not quite the same thing, but in saying that, YouTube is an amazing thing to have all these incredibly gifted engineers and producers giving their secrets.
How long did that last at that gig?
So I worked there for 8 years. So I worked there from the Hobbit films right through all the Taika Waititi films like Hunt for the Wilder People. We worked on a film called Wolf Warrior 2, which was like the highest grossing Chinese film of all time, and right through to Mortal Engines. At that point in time, I'd had 2 kids, and My dad growing up was always there as like my basketball coach and, would come along to my games. And I was realizing I was starting to become one of those parents that wasn't going to be there for his kids as much. All the guys that I was working with, Chris Boyce and Michael Hedges and Samanik and Gary Summers, they're in their 60s and they've got much older kids. They talk about how much they miss their kids' lives. And, they've won 4 Academy Awards, but they were like, man, if I could actually be there with my kids more, I would. And so I just kind of had that drilling along in the back of my mind. And then I got a really bad flu. Like it was killing me. My whole side of my body was falling apart. And I was working on this ADR gig and I said to my boss, I was like, I don't think I can hold in this cough without, I just can't hold in this cough. It's so vicious. And he was like, well, there's no one else to do this ADR gig. Just see how you go. So I held in my cough for 4 hours while I was in the room with this artist. And as soon as the artist left, I just collapsed to the floor. I had this coughing fit. They rushed me to the doctor and turns out I had pneumonia. And it was like a very, very bad case of it. And so that took me about a year to recover. It really, really messed me up, and it made me realize that I was going to die if I stayed in this industry because, a lot of people don't realize that when you're working on those big Hobbit films, we were doing back-to-back 100-hour weeks, right? You would just do 100. In the last 8 days of Hobbit 3, we did 146 hours in 8 days. So that's, you'll do a 30-hour shift, sleep 3 hours, do a 24-hour shift, sleep 3 hours. It's not productive. It's definitely not good for the mental health. It's not good for the physical health. It's good for the bank account. But it's not the healthiest of careers working in that industry. And so when I was working on The Hobbit, I was working with a sound editor, a dialogue editor, and he ended up getting a disease and he left the industry, and then he came back as a tutor at one of the universities. And he gave me a call one day and he was like, hey, like, you're the music guy. You love music. These other guys love film. Like, what are you doing? You should be in music. You shouldn't be in film. I'm like, yeah, I know. Like, I know. But all my workmates were like, you'll never be able to make it in music. Music's too hard to make it. There's no money in music. And I believed them. I was like, yeah, there's no money in music. How am I ever going to make this a reality? And so this guy called me and he was like, hey, just to let you know, the university's opened a commercial facility, or just about to. It's like 220 square meter tracking room. It's got a Neve console. It's got an SSL. It's got all the best vintage equipment. It's got tape machines. It's got vintage Pultex, all of this kind of stuff. I think you'd be a good fit. You should come and be the house engineer. I kind of pondered it, but I had a love-hate relationship with university institutions, especially when it comes to the creative arts, because I didn't like the fact that students were coming out with $60,000 debt in an industry where there are no jobs. It was conflicting, but I thought if I work there, it's going to be 9 to 5 hours because it's a university. I'm going to be able to see my kids more. And so I made the decision to quit. And it was a little bit of a back and forth because I quit. And then Park Road, when I told them that they were quitting, they were like, we'll do anything we can to keep you. We'll give you a pay rise. We'll let you work whatever hours you want. You don't have to work the crazy hours anymore. And I was like, oh, that sounds pretty good. But then I kind of fell asleep in my studio that I had in my house. And I was looking up at my synthesizers and guitars and microphones. And I'm like, no, it's music. Like I love film and I still love working on film, but it's music that makes me breathe. So I quit and I worked at the university studio for about a year and a half, and then the whole world went into lockdown. And just before the world went into lockdown, I just built a recording studio off the front of my house. So I was doing that while I was at the university and building this kind of room inside a room, floating floor construction studio that I was hoping to do my music projects from.
I always ask this kind of at the end of an interview, but I want to ask it now because it seems relevant. You were making a lot of money at Park Road. Were you saving that money?
I was putting it into my house. So basically anytime I got like a really big payday, I just put like $10,000 straight onto my mortgage. So I was chipping away at my mortgage all the time, but no, any of that money went into my kids, into my house, basically. But the whole time I was working in the film industry, so I'd be working on, say, the big budget films, they can afford to do 100-hour weeks, but the normal indie films, they can't afford those hours. So it's typically 9 till 7. And so what I was doing is I'd work until 7 o'clock, and then I'd come home and an artist would turn up at 7:30 and or 8 o'clock, and I'd kiss my kids goodnight, and then I'd go into the studio. I'd work till like 1 o'clock in the morning. And I did that for 5 or 6 years. Basically every second night I'd be in my home studio working with an artist. And so all of that money that I got from music production gigs that wasn't Park Road Post money went straight back into equipment. So I was just buying microphones and buying guitars and building up this catalog of equipment, because I hoped that one day I'd be able to open my own facility, which I have. And yeah.
Well, that's great, because so like you're paying down your mortgage, you're assembling an arsenal of gear. When you took the lower paying gig at the college, how did that work out? Did you still have a fair amount of money in the bank, or were you kind of down?
It was lower paying, but it was still enough to get by. It was a good salary for the amount of hours that I was doing. Mm-hmm. But basically what it allowed me to do is pick up more music production jobs, because I had more, it was more consistent that I could book something in. At Park Road Post always comes first, right? So if I'm like supposed to be producing a band on the weekend, and Avatar's like, hey, we're going to have to work this weekend. It's like, cool, I'm canceling that gig, And so what it meant that when I went to the university was that I could actually be like, no, I'm not working this weekend. I'm working Monday to Friday at the studio essentially, and I can book in all these other projects. So I was able to do that. But I still, even at that point, I didn't think I'd be able to go full-time as a music producer. I thought it's too hard. There's not enough money. I was still working with pretty low-paying clients at that point in time. And it's funny because, the world went into lockdown, and the university were paying me to just be on Zoom for the students, and reach out to them and, still do some workshops just over Zoom. And it wasn't a very challenging or demanding position at that point. So a lot of the time I'd have my laptop there for the students, and I'd be like, having calls with them, and then I'd jump into my Pro Tools rig in my studio and carry on mixing and getting in all this work from around the country. And it got to the point where lockdown lifted, and the university was like, right, it's time to come back. And I was like, I've realized that I'd had about 6 months worth of work lined up from music. And I was like, well, if I go back to the university full time, I'm not actually going to be able to fulfill these projects. So I was like, this is the perfect time to actually quit and go full time. And funnily enough, that everyone that was telling me that there's no money in music, it's too hard to make it as a music producer. In the first year that I went as a full-time music producer, I made more money than I ever made on any of those Hobbit films or any of the Park Road Post gigs. And it's continued to be that way ever since.
That is shocking.
Yeah.
And it's funny too, is I don't want to generalize and paint a broad picture here, but there's a fair amount of ex-music people who work in film, who work in, post-production, who are like, music, you can't make any money there.
Yeah. And I think, like this podcast that you do, where you focus on the business aspects and the workflows and all that kind of stuff, I think so many music producers run their business like a hobby. And I think one of the best things that I did is, I think our mutual friend, Brian Hood, who ran the, 6-figure home studio podcast years ago and did his course. I ended up doing that course, and I was like, oh, no one in my country is running this like a business. They're all running it through word of mouth. They're all running it just like a hobby that gets paid. So I'm like, I'm going to take this seriously. I'm going to run this like a business, like I made merch on a Tiny Triumph Recordings t-shirt.
Yeah.
So every single project I did with an artist, I'd give them a shirt, and really focused on the Google 5-star reviews, and just focused on running it like a business as much as I could. And I think people really appreciated that professionalism and really appreciated that I was trying to do something a bit different. And for whatever reason, it just kind of stuck and it worked.
That's interesting. So by the time you quit the teaching gig, did you have the studio outside of the house set up?
Yeah. So it literally, it got finished a week before lockdown started. And so it was just a small space, I think it was like 5.6 meters by 3.8 or something like that. The reason why I designed it like that was because when I was working at Park Road, in the ADR rooms, you were always in the room with the artist. That's the way Peter Jackson designed the studio. Was he wanted to be there, direct communication. He didn't want to have to deal with talkback mics. He didn't want someone behind the glass. He wanted that personal connection, and he wanted to be able to turn to the artist or the actor, the actress, and say, try it like this, break down, and breaking down those barriers of communication. And I loved that. Anytime I went to a studio that I was working from, I'd be talking to the artist and they're like, we can't hear you. I'm like, oh, I forgot the talkback button. So I wanted to build a studio that was very intimate, very, small, personal. I wanted to design it small because at the university that had a 220 square meter tracking room, it took so long to set anything up. You want to plug up a guitar and you've got to walk 50 meters, you know. So I wanted everything accessible. Like my guitar amps had mics plugged in on them all the time with dedicated compressors and preamps. Synthesizers had their own preamps. Everything was mic'd up, ready to go. So if an artist said, hey, I want to put some Juno 60 on this, it's like, cool, turn it on, play. And so, yeah, I wanted to create that little intimate environment. And so that was off the front of my house. So I'd basically walk my kids to school, which was just at the bottom of the street, walk home and produce an artist for a day, and then walk down, pick my kids up, bring them home, cook them dinner. Yeah, it was great.
So currently, as it stands, Tiny Triumph is still a studio outside of the house, right?
No. So me and my partner of that time, we separated 3 or 4 years ago. And so it was amicable. So I carried on working from that studio. But I was like, man, I've got to find a different studio. I've got to find somewhere that I can work from that's not in that house, because, you know, we're going to have to sell that house at some point soon. And so I was looking around for a studio space for a long time. And so because that studio was so small, it meant that anytime I was recording a band, there was another studio in town that I would hire out, and usually on the weekend. So I'd go to the studio, record drums, record bass, record the bands, and then I'd bring it back and use it as like a kind of satellite overdub room, kind of like the mothership model of recording studios, you know? So I'd do all my vocals there, the synths there, maybe horn sections there. And, anyway, so I was calling around real estate agents trying to find like the right location for a studio, and just couldn't find anything that worked. And I was so heavily booked up that what would often happen is people would reach out to me wanting to work with me, and I'd listen to their stuff and I'm like, oh, this isn't the caliber of artists that I want to work with. You know, maybe I didn't gel with their style or whatever. And there was a couple of studios that I would always refer them to. I'd be like, oh, go check out this studio, go check out that studio. And there was this one guy that rang me one day, and I could tell on the call, I'm like, oh, it's not really my vibe. So I was like, go check out the studio in town. And he was like, oh, can you send me the details? And I was on Instagram. And so I kind of went to their Instagram page to try and find their phone number or whatever. And I saw they had just posted a new video. And so once I got off the call, I clicked on the video, and it was them announcing they were shutting down their studio. And I was like, oh, and it had like just been posted. And so I called up the guy who I'd never met, and I was like, hey, has anyone taken over the lease? And they were like, no, but like, if you want it, call up the landlord right now, because we're just about to go at the vocal booth with the sledgehammer. You know, they spent $40,000 building this beautiful vocal booth. And so I called up the landlord, and I was like, hey, I'd love to lease this building, like if it's possible. And they were like, yeah, cool. They sent me through the contract, and I moved in within a couple of weeks, and it was all, you know.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay. So the original studio outside of the house was one incarnation, and then Tiny Triumph, as it stands today, is that studio that we're talking about?
Yeah, the one that you see on my website. And so it's like a rooftop recording studio kind of overlooking the city. It's kind of got like an indoor-outdoor flow, so you can actually, like, you know, if you're wanting to record guitars, you can literally walk out onto the rooftop with the jack leading into the amp room, and just play looking at Parliament.
Wow. Yeah. Super cool. And so you leased that building, and how long have you been there?
So I've been there for about a year now.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And how's that working out?
It's been amazing. I there was that part of me that I realized I was going to have to raise my rates because my expenses have gone up. But in saying that, it's kind of going to be cheaper for the bands anyway, because previously I would work with a band and produce them, and I would charge them a production fee, right? It's, you know, set amount per song. And then they would have to pay for the studio hire. So we'd go to another studio in town, they would pay for that studio hire, and then would come back and I'd carry on working on my productions, or the productions in my studio. And so with this, it was like, oh, okay, I might have to switch to a day rate because, you know, the added expenses. And so I was a little bit nervous going in there, being like, oh, my rates are going up. How are people going to respond? But ever since my rates went up, no one said no. You know, they've all been like, yeah, cool, sounds good.
So you have the external studio, but then you have the ability to work from home as well.
Yeah, so this house that you see in the background, so I've got a mixing room here. So the reason why I've got my mixing room in my house is because, you know, I try to be a present dad, right, and try to do like the school pickups. So I've got set days that I record bands, and then the rest of the days I'm mixing from home. And the reason why I'm mixing from home so I've had to buy 2 setups, you know, one for home and one for the studio. And that's so I can basically go and pick my kids up at 3:00, bring them home, have them just sit around and read while I carry on mixing for a couple of hours, and then cook them dinner.
Wow. And just so I'm clear, you mentioned splitting with a partner. Was that a studio partner or was that a life partner?
Yeah, that was my ex-wife.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So it's obviously co-parenting is never an easy thing, but the one thing that co-parenting has done has meant that there's half the week that they're at their mum's house and half the week that my kids are here. And so that means that on the half the week where they're not here, I'm able to work as much as I possibly need to. So I could, do a 10-hour day, 12-hour day, whatever. And then on the days that I'm here, I work like 6 hours because that's the school time,
That's great. And what are your age ranges you're dealing with the kids?
Well, so we got 5 kids, but that's I've got 3 of my own kids and 2 stepkids. So we got 2 4.5-year-old twin daughters. So that's my current partner's children. So yeah, they're 4.5, and then I've got a 7-year-old daughter. I've got a 9-year-old son and an 11-year-old son.
Wow,
it's madness, absolute madness.
That is madness. Yes,
and the madness comes from the fact that half the week the kids are at their co-parents' house, and so it's just super quiet. Me and my partner get puzzles out, and we'll sit there and we'll meditate and drink ceremonial grade cacao and put jazz on in the background, and it's nice and zen, and we meditate together. And then on Wednesday the kids come back and it's just chaos. It's just crap everywhere. There's screaming going on. It's just like it's a madhouse.
Oh man, I don't mean to laugh, but
Oh, if you don't laugh you'll cry.
Yeah, and it's interesting too, and like I'm one of 5 kids. My wife is one of 8, and we could only muster having 2 because I think if we had a third, somebody would have gotten hurt. It was just like, I think I'm good with 2.
Yeah. Funnily enough, I was good with 2 as well, but the world has a funny way of kind of showing up and giving you what you need.
Life gets in the way. Well, you know what? Though I will say this to the parents out there, I think will appreciate a little bit of this thought, and that is I think when you're a parent and an audio professional, and I'm sure it's like this with anything or most things, I feel that it really forces your hand to really get your shit together and prioritize your time, because you're like, okay, I got 4 hours and then I got to go pick the kids up. So it's like, do you want to goof around and test out, kick drum samples for the next 2 hours, or do you want to actually get the song mixed?
Yeah, that's a funny thing. I feel like when I didn't have kids, I spent so much time like A/Bing plugins. I'd like get the different SSL channel strips and I'd boost 50 hertz and I'd be like, okay, which one sounds better? And I ended up beta testing for like 5 different plugin companies like Plugin Alliance and Kush and Exponential Audio and stuff. And I would be spending so much time and like testing out all these vocal mics and being like, oh, what one's the best? And now it's like, no, the best one is just the one that just gets the job done in the moment, And I think that's right. Like you've got to be efficient. You've got to be fast. But not only that with kids, but I think they also force you to get your shit together as well. Like I gave up drinking maybe 4 years ago. Not that I had a problem with it, but you have a couple of drinks in the evening and you wake up just a little bit kind of grumpy in the morning, a little bit sluggish. And I was like, man, when I got to get kids ready for school, I don't want to be sluggish. So I gave up alcohol, and I was like, I want to be around to see my grandkids. So I got into exercise and got into healthy eating, and and then I'd get grumpy with the kids as I'd be getting them ready for school. So I got into meditation, and that's helped me stay zen. I think one of my mates in the film industry, Stephen Gallagher, he said something to me before I had my first kid. He was like, having kids is the hardest thing you'll ever do. It's also the best thing you'll ever do. And It's so true. It is both of those things at the same time. It's so hard being a parent, and it's the best thing you'll ever do.
Yeah, really. I couldn't agree more. It's quite challenging. And then couple it with an audio career, and it forces a lot of creative thinking and time management, as we said. Jumping back, talking about Brian Hood and the Six Figure Home Studio podcast, talk to me a little bit about not only what you learned out of all of that, but are the things, newer things that you've picked up on that you find are things that you would recommend to the audience to say, keep an eye out for this, or try this, or, money things, promotion things, business things that help us as audio professionals continue to do what we do?
Yeah, I think one of the most important things, and like I've kind of ebbed and flowed around what's the most important thing. You know, we've all got limited time, so we've all got limited energy to put towards something. And sometimes that changes on my business, like where I'm putting my energy the most. Something that I've realized recently, I had a coffee date with one of my artists, and this was such an important lesson for me. This was literally like a week or two ago, and I've produced all of her songs. We've got a great relationship. She'll come around and we'll have coffee, and you know, it's just a really good friendship. And she's working on her second album at the moment, just writing the songs. And she came around because she was like, "Hey, I just want to really have a catch up." I'm like, "Cool, yeah, sweet, come around." And we were just chatting, and then at some point she goes, "Hey, I just wanted to check in. I just want to see, do you still want to do this project?" And I'm like, "Yeah, of course I do. Why would you think I don't?" And she was like, "Oh, it's just, I never really hear from you. You know, like if I send you a message, you might send me like quite a quick reply, but you don't really seem enthusiastic about what I've got going on." And I'm like, "Oh, like, no, I am. I'm really enthusiastic. It's just that I got 5 kids and I run a business, and if I'm with an artist, I'm super present with them. You know, from 9 to 7 o'clock, I'm with that artist. I'm not checking my emails. I'm not doing anything else. And then when I get home, I'm trying to be a present partner and trying to give her the attention because, you know, I don't want to get divorced again. You know, like I've got to get my exercise in. I've got to get my meditation. Like, life is just busy, and I love this project. I really, really believe in it. It's just that I don't have the capacity to actually write long messages or check in very frequently. This artist didn't have kids, so she has no idea what it is to have 5 kids. And it was just a very, very important lesson for me. And it reminded me that just because my life is busy and just because my life is hectic doesn't mean that I shouldn't be taking just a little bit of extra time just to show the artists that I'm working with that I'm still really excited about their projects, because I am, you know. And that actually happened a few years ago. Another old artist, we'd worked on an album together, and we finished the album, and then he basically just, you know, he went on with his life and I went on with mine, and I just didn't check in on him. And he thought that at the end of the album project that I'd got like grumpy with him or didn't like him or pissed off with him. And it couldn't be further from the truth. I loved the guy, but it's just that I just moved on to the next project, carried on working, moving on to the next project, and not really looking back and being like, "Oh, I should check on him and see how he's doing." And so that's really reminded me, like, one of the most important things in order to make this a career is actually nurturing relationships. You know, it really is checking in on past artists every couple of months and just being like, "Hey, how's it going? Like, do you want to catch up for a coffee?" Like, and not trying to get work, but just to nurture those relationships, to stay top of mind, you know, to remind the artists that you still exist, that you still care, that you love their music. I think nurturing relationships is the thing that will help us survive, like, the AI revolution, you know, that human connection. It is the most important thing. I think it's far more important than marketing, more important than advertising, because when you've got a good relationship with an artist, that's the best form of marketing, because they're going to go and tell people. They're going to be like, "Hey, you should work with Toby because, you know, he cares about his artist or he cares about his music." And so, yeah, I think that's the thing that I've learned the hard way over the years, for sure.
Wow. That is brilliant. I love it. And you're right, because let's face it, you know, the musicians that we work with they're sensitive people, you know, not like we're not sensitive, but I mean, you know, they're a little more out there with you know, wearing their heart on their sleeve, and hell, fronting a band is a tough thing, right? So to take that extra time and check in and be that anchor point for them, such a critical role to play.
And it doesn't take much time, you know. So one of the things I've started doing lately is I've started setting my alarm half an hour earlier. So now I get up at 6 o'clock in the morning, I meditate for the first 25 minutes, and then I basically sit down on my laptop and just do admin. I'm like, book out the first 30 minutes of the day just to quickly write emails, you know, send messages, and just like take care of the business stuff. And then by then the kids usually wake up, and, you know, I'm getting them ready for school, and I'll do my cold plunge and all of that kind of stuff. But actually taking that time to really focus on the business, because I think as audio professionals, we spend so much time working in the business but not on the business. And it's at times where I get so booked up with work and I'm just doing project that the admin side of things fall by the wayside. You know, I'll forget to invoice a client, or I'll forget to follow up with a client. And allocating, even if it's just 10 minutes of the day, setting the alarm 10 minutes earlier just to get up, just to quickly reply to some emails, can actually move the needle in your business by a huge amount.
I want to ask you a little bit about, you know, we've talked about meditation and cold plunge. Talk to me about the role of those things in your life and exercise and how that affects everything you do in audio.
Well, I think it does affect every single thing, because if we don't look after our mental health, we can't be the best versions of ourselves. You know, if there are enough grumpy audio engineers out there in the world that they've got that corner covered. We need some more like actually compassionate engineers, people. Let's be honest, like recording studios have not been a safe space for artists for most of history. And especially female artists, they've not felt safe in recording studios. And a lot of that is the male ego just coming out, you know, and one of the things that meditation really forces you to see is that you are not your thoughts, you know, like you can't control your thoughts. Thoughts just arise, and you can either choose to associate your sense of self with those thoughts, or you can just notice them as thoughts, right? You know, so something maybe comes into your mind and you're like, oh, I'm so grumpy about that. And it's like, well, why am I grumpy about that? Like, do I need to be grumpy about that? And then you kind of watch it, and just basically refusing to give it power over your autonomy kind of just nudges it away. And then you're like, oh, actually, this feels way better not holding on to that negative thinking or whatever. And so what it does is when I'm in the studio and I'm working with an artist and I suggest an idea and the artist's like, no, I don't want to try that. Like in the past, I would have been like, well, no, come on, let's try that. Like, you know, probably would have fought. Whereas now I'm like, okay, cool. No worries. Let's move on to the next idea. If it's your song, you know, at the end of the day, like I'm here to serve your music, here to serve your art. If you don't like that idea, awesome. Let's just move on to the next idea. And I think it removes the ego from the process. And I don't think in a lot of ways, ego is great for the process. I think when you meditate, you become this kind of like open source where you just sit there and you notice sensations arise. And the same thing happens when you're mixing music, right? Or producing music. You sit there and you're noticing what's coming out of the speakers. And you might feel a sensation in your body and you're like, oh, something's not right. And I feel like the more that you meditate, more that you do those things, the more that you can notice that something's not right. And you can disassociate between what's not right in the ego and what's not right coming out of the speakers. And I feel like it can force you to make better decisions because you're truly observing what's actually coming out of the speakers. It's very, you know, I don't know if you've ever done this before, but you've been recording a vocalist and they sing a take and you're like, that was amazing. And come on, let's have a listen. And they come in and you're like, oh, no, we can do better. And it wasn't because the vocal take was good. It was because maybe you had a thought about, you know, what you were having for dinner, you know, or you had a thought about a nice memory, or the lighting in the room was like good in that moment, you know. And so I think that's the difference is kind of disallowing yourself from associating yourself with thoughts and being able to notice what's a thought, what's a sensation, and what's actually, you know, really happening and what's coming out of the speakers. Cold plunges, on the other hand, that's just doing something hard, right? Nobody wants to jump in an ice bath first thing in the morning, but by waking up and, you know, noticing that discomfort, being like, oh God, I don't want to hop in a cold plunge. I'm in the middle of winter right now, you know, it's free to snow up on the mountains and stuff. And I don't want to hop in the cold plunge, but I do it anyway. And that tells you that you do hard things, right? You know, so when you're having a hard conversation with a client, it's like, it's fine. I've done a cold plunge. Like, you know, like I can do hard things. This is easy. And so it kind of helps you realize that you're resilient, that you're resistant, that you can actually like do hard things and be okay. And so I wake up every single morning without fail and jump in an ice bath.
Give me your perspective or your philosophy on money management as an audio professional. I mean, obviously you've got all these kids and, you know, there's some financial responsibilities that happen there, especially co-parenting. So what is the strategy in general now that you take?
I mean, as soon as I get paid, they go onto multiple bank accounts, right? You know, like as soon as the money comes in, it's like 30% for savings, 15% for GST, and then I try and take 50% as personal income, and then that goes to, you know, paying rent and all of that kind of stuff. And then I've got my expenses account, which is, you know, what's left over, and then that expenses account, which is only 5% of my earnings, that goes into rebuying gear, you know, paying for new plugins or whatever. And so I try not to move that money around. It's like, that's the money. And I need to know that I've got savings in there because, you know, as you've you've experienced in your life, sometimes you get hit with an unexpected bill, you know. I last 3 years ago, I got hit with $24,000 worth of bills in the case of a month. You know, I'd been overpaid by our government for like working for families tax credit. So I had to pay $10,000 back in that. And there was business tax and all of this stuff. But because I was putting away savings, I mean, it was fine. You know, my savings account dropped way back down, but it was fine. And so I think I grew up with not a lot of money. You know, like our family was you know, probably quite poor at the time, but rich in love. And, you know, I remember times that were really, really hard financially for my parents. And I saw how much that hurt them and how much they struggled with navigating that. And I didn't ever want to be poor. You know, I didn't ever want to have my kids worry that they couldn't go on a school camp, you know, because we couldn't afford it. You know, I didn't want my kids to be like, oh no, I can't play basketball this term because my dad can't afford the subs. So I think being financially responsible was really, really important to me, and being like, hey, do I actually need to buy that $8,000 microphone right now? Maybe not. You know, I've already got a lot of $8,000 microphones. It's fine. I don't need more. And so I think just showing some level of restriction on if you actually need to buy that extra purchase. But I think also sometimes when the money is getting quite low, it's actually kind of a good thing because it lights a fire under your ass, and you've got to be creative of being like, oh, I need to get out there and start networking again. You know, whereas if your bank account's always positive and you're always doing well, maybe you're not going to be as encouraged to get out there and find the next gig because you're like, oh, I'm fine. You know,
obviously this has worked out quite well for you. So that tells me that the scene is strong. Is that true?
Yes and no. It's a really interesting scene in New Zealand because we're one of the most isolated countries in the world, right? You know, like we're so far away from everything. So it means that, you know, I mean, how do bands make money? They make money from touring, right? Especially in the States, you can play a different city every single night. In New Zealand, there's probably like 6 or 7 cities that you could play, and you can't play Monday to Thursday because no one's going to come out. So you can only do a tour, which is like a weekend tour, you know? And if you play the same city more than a couple times in a year, people will stop showing up. So the touring side of things is pretty hard. Like, especially in the city that I live in, it's a very band-centric city because we've got the jazz school and we've got like a music production school here. So there's lots of bands and artists that come here. The weather kind of sucks in Wellington. It is, like, as I said before we jumped on the call, it's the windiest city in the world. And when you live in such a windy city, maybe you don't want to get out so much. So instead you stay inside and work on your craft, work on your art, you know, get in a band room and practice. And so it's a really, really vibrant band scene. People, like, especially because of the jazz school, Wellington musicians are very, very good musicians. Most Wellington musicians play in like anywhere from 5 to 10 bands, you know, and one night they'll be playing punk rock, the next night they'll be playing cumbia, the next night they'll be playing like jazz, fusion. And so you get a lot of really talented musicians. And I don't know, man, we just, in Wellington, we seem to really, really love music. And so for whatever reason, people just want to keep making it, you know. It's quite different to some of the other cities in New Zealand because there's no record labels in Wellington. So it's not like we're getting record label money. So we're basically working on indie rates. But musicians keep turning up, you know, they keep wanting to make music. They keep wanting to express themselves. So it seems to be working. So how do you get your clients? Probably largely through word of mouth. Largely through just working on cool projects. You know, I've been fortunate enough to work with some of the biggest artists in New Zealand and had some records that have gone number 1 and number 2 and number 3. And, you know, like you work on enough of those projects and your name gets around. I think by and large, just trying to be a good person, you know, being a good human, and people tend to talk about it. I think especially as we touched on earlier, the fact that recording studios haven't been safe spaces, especially for female artists. And so a lot of my clientele is actually female. I think they actually feel, oh, like, you know, word gets around that Toby's not a creep, you know, you actually can come here and feel safe. A lot of my young female artists that I work with, say if they're younger than 18 or even younger than 20, I'll try and encourage them to bring a support person, you know, maybe their parents or something like that. So I get a lot of, you know, young 18-year-old girls that bring their mum along for the sessions and we'll work on projects, and those projects are really, really cool. And so, yeah, I think it's a lot of it is word of mouth, but I think a lot of it is all of those business things that I put into place. So if you like look at recording studios in New Zealand, I've got by far the highest rated recording studio on as far as Google reviews. I think I've got like 101 5-star reviews, and I think the next closest is something like 35. And that studio is Neil Finn from Crowded House's recording studio, and it's one of the most beautiful studios in the world. But if you're going by Google reviews, mine looks like the best, right? You know, because it's got the most social proof that it's a good place. You should change the name of the studio to Toby's Not a Creep. Toby's Not a Creep Recorder. Yeah. How long does it take you to get to Australia? It's about 4 hours. Is that a source of bands at all, or no? Yeah. I just finished working on an album for an artist from Melbourne. She flew over. I'd worked with her before, and she'd worked with a bunch of producers. And again, I think she'd worked with 5 guys, and all of them were creeps. And then she had heard that there was a guy in Wellington that wasn't a creep, and so she was traveling the country, and she was like, "Oh, maybe I'll pop in and have a coffee with him." And so she came in, and we had a chat, and we worked on a song, and she had a really good experience. So she's just flown back from Melbourne recently, and we worked on an album, and now she's about to release out in the world. And yeah, so I do occasionally get artists from different cities, different countries. I had an artist from Amsterdam come over and work with me like quite a few years ago, and yeah, it's close enough that it's not necessarily a barrier, but I definitely don't go out of my way to advertise to Australian clients. There's enough work as there is just in Wellington. So,
had you in the early days, had you considered going to Australia just because of proximity?
Yeah, in the early days, but I think to me, as far like I love my career, I've got the best job in the world, right? I go to work every single day, and it's nothing but gratitude. I'm so fortunate, and I don't take that for granted, and I don't take my artists for granted. However, the most important thing to me is my kids, and their well-being is the top priority. And there's been voices in my mind that have been like, you should move to LA, you move to Nashville. That's where the work is. But at the end of the day, my kids are so important to me, and I think New Zealand is probably one of the best countries in the world to raise kids. It's so safe here. When I go to the supermarket, I don't lock my car door. A lot of the times when I leave the house, I don't lock the front door. It's a safe place. It's a beautiful place. It's got so much nature and outdoors, activities and stuff. So as much as it would probably be good for my career to move to those places, I don't think it would be good for my lifestyle. And work-life balance is the most important thing to me. I can't be a good music producer if I'm not being a good father.
And cost of living there is what's the thought there?
It's insanely high.
Oh, is it? Okay.
Yeah. But we have amazing public sector. Hospitals are free. Every schools are free. We don't get sued here. It's everything is expensive. Food is insanely expensive. Electricity is expensive. Houses are insanely expensive, but the quality of life makes it worth it. Everyone here complains about how expensive things are, but if you end up in hospital and need to get your tonsils removed, it doesn't cost anything, right? It's just, you don't need to get private insurance for your health or anything like that. It's the schooling systems are great. Yeah.
What a concept.
Yes.
Jeez. Yeah. I say that with sheer sarcasm about the system we have here, but that's a whole nother podcast.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, fantastic. I'll put a link to the show notes, obviously, for the studio in there for everybody to check out. And man, I'm so glad that we got to chat. This has been cool. And hey, now I have a friend in New Zealand. You're actually the first New Zealander on the show.
Oh, well, you have to get some more on there. There's a lot of talented humans over here.
Well, let's make that happen.
Yeah, and thanks for having me on, man. I've been listening to the show for a long time, and it's really cool to connect and shoot the shit.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, excellent, man. Well, you take care, and thank you again.
Awesome. Cheers, man.